So depending on which time zone folks are currently in, because I know that folks in the greater San Diego area could be scattered across the country at the moment. Let me just say to some of you, good morning. To others of you, good afternoon. My name is George Salim. I serve as the Senior Vice President of National Programs at the ADL. I am currently in the Eastern time zone, working remotely from the American Midwest. This is the Cleveland skyline behind me, and it's really a pleasure to be on with my colleagues, Kathy, Megan, and more importantly, I am really thrilled to be here and having all of us on Team ADL hosting a longtime friend and colleague, Samar Ali. Before I kind of formally intro her, let me just say this to all of you who were really pleased to tune in today. You know, we're really fortunate at ADL to be engaged with leaders across the country on a range of different issues, both locally, regionally, as well as nationally and internationally. Samar, as you'll soon hear from kind of her background and her bio, if you haven't got a chance to see it yet, is someone who's a demonstrated global leader in her vision and in her work, but more importantly, and part of the reason she's so relevant to some of the work we do here at ADL is she's figured out and really has a lot of best practices and examples of how her global vision is locally and regionally applied. And I think she's really embodied that with her work in Tennessee, in Washington, and elsewhere across the globe. So it's really great for her to be with us today. We're trying more and more to integrate her into the broader ADL family. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from her today. By way of background, Samar is the president and CEO of Millions of Conversations. As a conflict resolution practitioner, she's the recipient of numerous awards, including the White House Fellows Impact Award, Vanderbilt University's Young Alumni and Professional Achievement Award, and has served in numerous roles and provided a lot of interaction and engagement and leadership with the World Economic Forum as well. At the intersection of civil rights and national security, as well as economic development, Samar has served as a White House Fellow in President Obama's administration and as the Assistant Commissioner for International Affairs for the Tennessee Governor, Governor Haslam's administration. Samar is currently working on her latest memoir, From the Holy Land to the Heartland, Olives and Sweet Tea, about one family's century-long quest for peace through belonging. And I will just say in advance, I'm going to be an early purchaser of that memoir. Currently, Samar is in Nashville, Tennessee, where she maintains a law practice through Bass, Berry, Sims, and is a commissioner on the Nashville Human Relations Commission. She holds both her degrees, both in law and political science, from Vanderbilt University. And just to kind of put this in context of grounding in ADL, Samar and I, as well as other members of the ADL team, you know, Kathy and Megan and other members of the ADL regional family, we've been working hard to include global voices and global visions like hers into the regional work that the ADL regional office in San Diego and elsewhere across the country really administer. So we're really thrilled to have this connection and have this synergy be with Samar, her organization, Millions of Conversations, and really thrilled to unpack it here on this session. So Samar, I've done too much talking. Let me turn it over to you and just say on behalf of the ADL family and all of our colleagues and friends who have joined us, thank you for being with us today. And let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, George. I really, truly appreciate it. And I appreciate the ADL family. And I also appreciate everything that Kathy and Tamara have done to get us ready for today. I would just start with also just asking you to give me a warning sign if I'm going over. I will start with the fact that my name, Samar Ali, the first name Samar is an Arab name, and it means a nice evening conversation from dusk until dawn. So I can go a long time. So just give me a signal when I'm going on too long. It is a privilege to be with you all today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and to hear my story. And so I've been asked to tell y'all a little story today, and that story happens to be my own. And so without further ado, I'll begin. And it really starts with where I grew up and my personal identity. So I am a Palestinian, Syrian, Arab American, Muslim Southern woman. And whenever people ask me about that, a lot of times people will respond to that with saying that I'm a walking conversation, I'm a walking conflict, and some people will even say I'm a walking controversy. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that today, but let me just take you to my hometown for a moment. And my hometown is Waverly, Tennessee. That's where I grew up, just minutes from Loretta Lynn's Dude Ranch. For those of you who are country music fans, you will have heard, or of the Grand Ole Opry, you will have heard of Loretta Lynn. And I knew her, and I know her and her family. We grew up down the road from her. And for those of you who belong to a certain generation, you'll appreciate that Waverly has been called many times Mayberry. And I remember this article that came out in the Tennessee and the local state newspaper about 12 years ago, and it said the last Mayberry standing, and it was about my hometown, Waverly. And for modern day times, it's called Schitt's Creek. The Tennessean most recently, just 3 months ago, referred to it as Schitt's Creek when they were running an article about the town hospital facing closure and what that would mean as the only hospital in that rural town. I was the daughter of a Muslim family, an Arab family within which was the only Muslim and Arab family within a 65-mile radius. And we really truly grew up bicultural. I started going to the Middle East at the age of 3, and I've been going back there ever since. I started off in a Baptist school. And then when the Baptist school closed because of funding problems, my parents enrolled me in a Catholic school. And after I was thoroughly confused, they decided that it was time to enroll me in the Waverly Public School System, which is where I truly felt a sense of belonging and where I graduated up in 1999. During the 80s and the 90s, I witnessed my town go from being one of the wealthiest counties in Tennessee. There are 95 counties in Tennessee, to being one of the poorest. And I saw as this town, as my hometown, was hit hard by what we now call the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the beginnings of, which we're now in the full-blown middle of, the opioid epidemic. It was this small town that really grounded me in my American experience and in my childhood experience. I went on to go to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And I learned many things at Vanderbilt, including how to be an activist and an ally and an advocate, and learning what those three words mean. I was a junior when the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened, which changed my life, our country's life, and our world forever. It was during that time that me and a number of students and the administration decided to host a come together ceremony to talk about how we could come together as one campus in a time where it felt that we could feel ourselves shifting. And we were like the sand was shifting beneath our feet, and we were trying to figure out what did it all mean. Right around that same time, again, as a Palestinian American woman, I took Hebrew. I learned Hebrew through Miriam Halachmi and found myself developing a strong friendship with Professor Halachmi, and learning Hebrew in addition to the Arabic that I spoke at home and also English. Enlightened me in many different ways. And through that, through those different experiences, my first 3 years at Vanderbilt, many things were happening. And I also decided to run for student body president. People told me I did not have a chance. They thought I was crazy. Many of my friends were worried about because of the time period that I was running in, what that would mean for my safety. And to all of our surprise, I became Vanderbilt student body president. And I don't think I could have guessed what would have unfolded after that. But just to name a couple of few things, me and a colleague who was the head of the Student Senate at the time decided to write a resolution to change the name of Confederate Memorial Hall. This was in late 2002 and beginning of 2003, and to drop the name Confederate and to drop the name Confederate and to call the dormitory Memorial Hall. We were not prepared for what happened after that. we had a number of, while we were successful in the resolution passed and the dormitory is today called Memorial Hall, it opened up a Pandora's box on campus. And we were met with overnight graffiti being sprayed on a number of other dormitories with a swastika, a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric that appeared, along with anti-Black and very racist statements that just erupted almost overnight across campus. We dealt with it, but it was a difficult time period. And it was during that time that we worked on writing a pamphlet, the first pamphlet for the Southern Poverty Law Center at the time, called 10 Ways to Fight Hate on College Campuses. Again, this was 17 years ago. And I sit here and I look today and I just think, what have we accomplished in that 17-year time period? Have we moved forward? Are we still at a status quo point, or are we moving backwards? What is actually happening in America today? It's been on my mind again now for almost 2 decades. And from there, I between Vanderbilt undergrad and Vanderbilt Law School, I decided as a martial artist to go teach Taekwondo in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And that was really beginning for me to sort of see these problems that I saw playing out locally, also at the global level, and really beginning to think about how do we change and how do we shift these systems that are pushing people down and that are preventing our communities from being their best selves. In law school, it was an Enlightenment time period for me, and this was right in the middle of the Iraq War happening, and I was really thinking a lot about what are these systems that we're a part of. Again, what are these systems? What are the laws that make them up? What are the regulations that make them up? What are the norms that make them up? This exploration continued when I clerked on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was when I was watching the court case after court case after court case that was in front of us, I realized again just the sentencing guidelines and the complications of 3 strikes you're out, and the school to prison pipeline. And it was a very overwhelming time period because I just felt that, you know, there were more problems than we had solutions. And what was on my mind a lot, and has continued to be on my mind, is what can one individual do when the problem is bigger than the individual? That led to a broader global exploration, and I left without a plan. I left Nashville, Tennessee in 2007 without a plan to return to my point of departure. I went to South Africa, and then I worked with Hogan Lovells in Washington, D.C. and in New York, and then was asked to open an office in the Middle East. And that took me all over Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, London, Paris, and people would met me with the question, where do you live again? Who are you exactly? What are you doing? And to which I would respond, which was the truth, I'm a cross-border transactional attorney. It was late one night when I was working with one of the partners at Hogan Lovells, when she said, you know, you really seem to have a passion for U.S. Middle East relations. Have you thought about the White House Fellowship? And I had never heard about the White House Fellowship before. And I went home, it was about 1 a.m. I went home and I looked it up and just thought to myself, there's no way they would pick somebody like me. I'm not qualified for that. But I'd learned a lot along the journey. And I've always been told, you know, don't internalize that imposter syndrome too much, and believe. And so I went for it. And to my surprise, it's a very long process, but to my surprise, I was awarded one of the 12 slots in the White House Fellowship program. There were 12 people in my class, and also received a security clearance, which was not easy. But to my surprise, and this is where it all begins, the next part, when I say it all begins, the chapter that I'm currently in, and that is this. When the announcement from the White House came out that said that I was going to be one of the 12 White House Fellows, my name was at the top of the list. Almost automatically, this conspiracy started about me. And I got swept into this whole birther movement that surrounded President Obama, and where people were questioning both my allegiance and my history and my claims along with President Obama's. And the night before, part of this happened because the night before was the White House state iftar dinner. And in the speech, President Obama made remarks that were supportive of a mosque being built near ground zero. And the next day, when the White House dropped the memo about the press release, issued the press release about me being a White House fellow, the conspiracy was that I was behind the president's decision to build a mosque near ground zero, and that I was a part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that President Obama was a part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that we were connected. This then engulfed me in a culture of suspicion, which many people asked me online, and also people who would encounter me and they knew who I was, they would say, you know, explain yourself. What's your purpose? What's your agenda? Are you really American? Do you really have America's interests at heart? And suddenly I was in the middle of a number of what we call, I was in the middle of the identity politics race. And it intensified, which I'll talk about in a minute, just to say, while I was working in the White House, the Arab Spring erupted. And there was a lot of hope there, which quickly shifted to anxiety, which quickly shifted to despair. And that experience for me really made me feel individually as if I was trapped in the narrative. I was trapped in this narrative that I couldn't seem to get out of, and made me think about Amartya Sen writing in one of his books about how we deal with this constant tension between who we are and who we believe we are, and who people think we are, and who they want us to be. And I really struggled with that. And I thought that that was going to be my struggle, that was what I was going to be dealing with. But oh no, fate had something more in store for me. And after the White House Fellowship, I did a lot of soul searching, and with my husband, and we decided that I would return home, that he would join me. He was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, and that we would return home to my home, to that point of departure. And as I was making that decision, the governor of Tennessee asked me to help develop a strategy, an international strategy, an economic development plan that would attract foreign direct investments and increase Tennessee trade around the world, and to bring the experience that I had abroad and that I also had developed as a White House fellow, to bring it home to Tennessee. And I said, you know, I believe in the power of local, regional, national, global, and connecting those dots. And I think that as somebody who's worked as a corporate lawyer and who's worked as a national security expert, that working in as an economic development practitioner makes sense for a number of reasons, because I see the nexus between economic development, civil rights, globalism, and national security. Before I could even say my name, the conspiracy that was connected to me at the White House followed me home to Tennessee, but in ways that I could have never imagined. I became the target of a multi-million-dollar media campaign that called me all kinds of names that I'm still to this day shocked by and hurt by, and quite frankly scarred by. From one of the reasons I'm scarred by it is because it hit at who I am as a person in terms of it questioned my values, it questioned my ethics, it questioned my integrity, and it questioned how I believe I want to exist in the world. That campaign they called me a financial jihadist. They called my father Dr. Jihad. They targeted me because of my identity, because of the religion that I practice. They said that I had radicalized when I was in the Middle East. They said I was not to be trusted. They accused my family with no facts, without any basis. They just accused, out of the blue, accused my family of giving money to Hamas, of giving money to Hezbollah. They started a billboard campaign against me, and a protest campaign of people who were marching actually in the streets against me, calling me a terrorist and demanding my resignation and demanding actually that the governor be impeached over this. And the reasons that they gave were straightforward, because I was Muslim, and that it was an oxymoron for a Muslim to be an American and for a Muslim to be trusted to serve in government. They said that I had taken over the Democratic Party, that I had infiltrated it successfully, and now I was trying to infiltrate the Republican Party and the state government of Tennessee. And resolutions demonizing me like this actually passed in over a dozen counties across those 95 counties. It got so bad that and people were questioning my way of life, of saying, we don't trust her way of life. It got so bad that late one afternoon, early evening, one of my colleagues walked into my office and said, "Do you have a minute?" And he sat down and he said, "I just got off the phone with the FBI and the TBI, which is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and the Fusion Center run by Homeland Security, which George is familiar with. And they want to speak to you because they are investigating this gentleman," and he showed me the man's picture, for attempted murder. And this one's serious. And we want you to know what he looks like in case you see him. And they're going to go and pay him a visit, and they're investigating this further. But time is of the essence, and we wanted to let you know we're in the gray area right now, and you need to know his name and you need to know what he looks like. And I put my head down and I took a deep breath like I just did right now, and I thought to myself, I might not survive this. I've come home, and my home has changed. And as much as I think and I feel that I belong here, do they think that I belong here? Can I belong here? Where am I? And what's happening? And I asked him, and he saw that my voice was shaking, and he said, "You know, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Why do they hate me so much? Why do they fear me so much?" And he said, "You know, I'm sorry, they fear your way of life." And my heart sunk. I was just sank. And, there wasn't anything left to say. And we went through the process. I met with the state troopers. I met with TBI, FBI, all the different people. They did a bomb sweep of the building the following Monday. It was a lot. And I wasn't sure if we would turn it around, quite frankly. And but here's what happened. We were able to build the momentum to push at least enough back of where I felt that I could stay. And that was through a serendipitous interaction and synergies that came together from both the politicians, including Governor Haslam and Senator Corker and Senator Alexander, and a number of members of the state legislature coming together and saying, "Not in my community," and standing up for me. And Governor Haslam himself, I was even surprised how far he took it when a journalist asked him, "Governor, what's an issue that you would resign over because you felt that there was a moral dilemma that required you to resign?" And he said, "I would resign over the Samar Ali issue. This state owes her an apology." And the Tennessean, again, the main newspaper in the state, ran that the next day, saying the governor says the state owes Samar Ali an apology. And he talked about how it was un-American, what had happened against me. And he talked about our American values. And I bring it up because that's really important, the point about talking about the American values. We were able to rally enough people behind that. In addition, the Jewish Federation of Tennessee and many other organizations and many other communities, including the Muslim community in Tennessee, including many of my rural friends and families and people who recognized my story, stood behind me. And we were able to push back to the point of where the Tennessean also called this the story of the year. And I knew that we had made progress on a number of fronts, but 2 months later, this went on for 6 months, but 2 months after the governor made that statement, And when we saw the state legislature, again, the tenor of the state legislature beginning to change around this issue, it was time to roll out the international strategy that I had put together. And I was speaking in Murfreesboro, which is I was speaking at the Murfreesboro Chamber of Commerce, which is, for those of you familiar with the story, because CNN did a story about this, it's down the street from where a mosque had been torched at that point, just 2 years before my speaking engagement at that Chamber of Commerce, where I was talking about the international strategy for the state and how we could help places like my hometown, Waverly. And after I finished, I remember it was storming down hard outside. I stepped off the stage and this woman came up to me. She didn't have a name tag on. And she said, do you know who I am? And I looked at her and I said, no, ma'am, I don't. And she said, well, you should know who I am. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I should, but I don't want to lie to you. And I don't know who you are. And she said, well, I'm a member of the state legislature, and I'm one of the people who led the initial protests against you and who helped pen the resolution against you. And I just like, wow, it just really like hit me. I wasn't ready for that moment. And I looked at her and I said, I guess I should know you. And she said, well, I wish I would have met you before today, because we might have not had to go through all that. And she said, because you don't look like a terrorist. You look like one of us. And it was at that moment that I said, well, I'm not a terrorist, and I am one of, I am a part of this community, and I wish you would have spoken to me too. I wish you would have picked up the telephone and called me and had that conversation with me. And she said, but and then she said to me, and she looked down at her shoes at this point. She was embarrassed, I could tell. And she said to me, you can't possibly identify with those Muslims. You can't possibly believe in what in that book, that Quran. And I said, no, I do. I said, I not only associate myself with Muslims, ma'am, I am a Muslim. And I do believe in the Quran. I am a practicing Muslim. But what you fear the Quran says and what I believe the Quran says are two totally different things. And that's where we need to have this conversation. And that's where we need to have to come together. And I said, and also I am a Tennessean and I'm an American, and I can hold all of those things. And we can hold all of these identities and work together. And that's what the strategy plan is about. And that's what I want us to focus on, not of these identity politics. And it was from that day forward, I realized, it didn't take much for me and that member of our state legislature to become friends and to see a way forward and to work together. And 1 month later, the majority of the state legislature, in part including this woman, came to one of the ceremonies to mark the beginning of our international strategy, which was held at the Hermitage Hotel, the same hotel where it was decided that which was Tennessee, which was the last state to push us over for the votes that we needed to support the 19th Amendment. And in any event, to just kind of bring it back to where we are today, to just kind of fast forward a bit across the past few years. After that experience working for the Tennessee governor who is Republican, and also combining that with my experience working for President Obama, who's a Democrat, and working for both, I was asked to work as a third-party mediator to the Syrian conflict. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, my maternal family is Syrian American. I actually speak Arabic with a Syrian dialect and Syrian accented Arabic. And I took the combined experiences that I had, and I worked for about 4 years as a third-party mediator, which is an entirely different conversation to have. But just to say that coming on in 2016, the people who worked with me, who were our global practitioners, but from the US, we all decided that it was time to turn our focus home. And I knew this, and I was watching this from my time working in the government and seeing that the divides that I had seen and witnessed, from the identity politics to the disinformation campaigns and the misinformation campaigns, were driving us further from each other. I was seeing the urban-rural divide. I lived that urban-rural divide. I knew what divides looked like, and I was worried about the warning and the red flags that I saw around us in the summer of 2016. Many people would say that it was after November 16th that they saw after November 2016 where they noticed the red flags. I actually saw it in the summertime of that, where it was just kind of like intensifying and not going anywhere good. And that's in part, I saw that because I said, regardless actually of who wins, this country has a problem. And we're at a crossroads as we become a majority-minority community. The South and this country have never had a proper truth and reconciliation process. And because we've never had that, we are in danger. We are in danger of these divides that could seep into and manifest themselves in such ways of where they just become dangerous and intractable for quite some time. So I felt that her work here now is to really think about how do we move forward united rather than divided, and in a sincere way that is rooted in dignity without exception. And that leads us to Millions of Conversations, the organization that George mentioned that I'm the president and CEO of. It's an organization that we started in 2017 with the purpose to transcend divides through media and one-on-one communal dialogue. We want to rebuild the public square so that we can build consensus around common values. We want to establish a new social contract around those common values that allows us to even want to share a future together where we see ourselves in that future. And that starts, in my opinion, with changing the existing narrative to counter the existing toxic narrative that we all know we're going and we're witnessing right now. And I use the word witnessing on purpose. And that toxic narrative leads us to fear, hate, and in some instances, violence. Those narratives that demonize, those narratives that polarize, it's the same thing that I saw and that I've seen the world over. And we've seen throughout history. It starts with the labeling and the demonization of the other, be it fill in the blank. It starts with the labeling of the other, which then leads to building this animosity against that other. That animosity then leads to fear. You begin to fear, actually before fear, it leads to blame. You begin to blame the other for X, Y, and Z ailments, be it your economic ailment, be it your healthcare ailment, whatever that might be, it leads to blame. That blame then turns to fear. That fear rather quickly turns to anger. The anger then hardens in many instances to hate, and the hate, depending on where the person is mentally, leads to violence. So if we want to disrupt those cycles of fear, hate, and violence, we actually have to start at the very beginning. And that's the labeling of the other. And that's why the countering of that narrative is so important. That's why addressing these disinformation campaigns head on is so important, and these misinformation campaigns, and really giving thought to whose responsibility is it? We must answer that question together. And in my opinion, it's all of our responsibility. We thought about this and we began to test our theory of change through research that we commissioned through MNC Saatchi. We asked MNC Saatchi to conduct 10 focus groups in partnership with us in 5 different states around the country. We call it our Just Like Us research project. We focused on Islamophobia, and we worked this across with 100 different people who we listened to understand, one, how did the demonization of the Muslim community evolve in this country? What's the language that's being used? And perhaps most importantly, can we move people who are sympathetic and vulnerable to that anti-Muslim messaging? Can we move them to neutral, positive? And to my, just say like, thank God, we were able to find that yes, we actually can. And the techniques are are not impossible. They're not larger than life for us to be able to do. There's no sort of like magic formula of what it takes. And I'll give you just a very quick example. And that is, again, that they asked me to tell this as a story. So I'll tell you a little story. At the very last focus group, it was around 10:30 p.m. And since many of you are on the West Coast, it was in San Bernardino, California. It was actually in California. And the facilitator came to the back room. I was behind the window, and he said, "I want to do something that's unprecedented. Many of these people have said that they have never met a Muslim before. You've seen that in selecting them to participate, they said on a scale of 1 to 10, they gave an 8 or a 9 in terms of being okay with placing Muslims in concentration camps if there's another terrorist attack. You know where they stand on these issues. You know they're sympathetic and vulnerable to anti-Muslim messaging. And I want to know if you will step in the room and have a conversation with them and let us see what happens." I said, knowing what I've been through, and quite frankly, knowing that every time I go through, even telling the story what I've been through, I am scarred by this. And I said, I'll do this. I'll go ahead and do it. And I walked into the room, and everybody was tense. And after a couple of comments, and I said, it took a lot of courage for you to say that you would be okay with me coming in here, given that you genuinely fear me, and vice versa. It took a lot for me to come in here, quite frankly, and sit with you, given what I've been through. And here we are. That took courage. And I want to have a conversation with you. After I took all of their questions and I answered them one by one. And at the beginning, one of the questions, I said, I understand, as I was answering it, I said, I understand that many of you fear my religion. And the woman sitting across from me said, and we fear you. And I said, and you fear me. I want to talk about that. After 20 minutes, the woman who had said that to me had tears in her eyes. And she said to me, when you walked in here, I feared you. And now I fear for you because of people like me. And another person asked me, who was sitting to her left, you just transformed this room. How do you transform the country? And I said, I'm not going to transform the country. We are going to transform the country. We are going to do this together. And that's what we're trying to do at Millions of Conversations. We're trying to take that sentiment and we're trying to scale it. And we're headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a storytelling town. And we're national, but that's where we're headquartered. And it really kind of takes me back to this. It all starts with a conversation. With a conversation, that's where we begin to see each other's humanity. It doesn't end there, but that's where it starts. Because when we humanize, that is how we prevent each other from being dehumanized. That is how we disrupt that cycle that leads to fear, hate, and violence. And I just want to end this section and this part, because I know we're going to be getting into Q&A now, with a quote from T-Bone Burnett, who's a legendary music producer and lives between California, the West Coast, and here, Nashville, Tennessee. As T-Bone says, let us build a future where we all want to live. Let us build a future that we finally don't have to forgive. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer, for sharing your story. That last one especially, I just had chills through my entire body. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Nevels. I am the Assistant Education Director at ADL Los Angeles, and I will be moderating this Q&A. So, Summer, I have a couple of prepared questions, but I would like to invite everyone to put any questions that you have into the chat. We're pulling them. We've gotten a couple already. So as they come in, we'll pick a few and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. But this question, I think, is a perfect segue from this last story that you shared. As we as a country are working to dismantle so many systems of oppression, nationally, and that also reflect out into the global space, what role can storytelling have in this fight to dismantle oppression?
For me, like I mentioned, storytelling's everything in terms of the start. It's everything about the start. Because when you're divided, if you can't Storytelling is how you humanize, and it's how you build empathy. And you have to do that before people will even begin to listen to you, really listen to you, and then begin to empathize with you, and then begin to want to see the best for you and to take responsibility for that, which then leads you down this journey together of building rather than destroying. And being willing to speak up when they hear somebody demonize another in their within their kind of like family and friend space, to say, no, I don't actually see it like that, you know. So that's where it really begins in the story. People have to see themselves in your story. It helps when people begin to see themselves in your story, that commonality, because it's that commonality that bonds us as humans, and that's the key to humanizing. I'm a human too. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. Don't cancel me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that piece that you brought up about challenging the things that we might hear, you know, and I always say it's especially hard when it comes from a loved one or from your inner circle. And I think this is really rooted in your work with Millions of Conversations, but what recommendations or advice do you have for engaging in dialogue with someone who has fundamentally different values and opinions than you?
You know, the first step in it is to not launch into a lecture series. And so I think it's like really listening to the person as they're speaking, and that's not affirming what they're saying, but listening to where they might be coming from, to see where there's an entry point to bring them in. You know, it's like when that woman said to me, "I fear you." I could have reacted in many different ways. Or when the state senator came up to me and said, "I wish I led the movement. I was one of the leaders of the movement against you." I could have reacted in a number of different ways. But I chose that. I knew that even her coming up to me and saying that was a vulnerable moment. I didn't excuse it, but I gave her the space to explore it. And so I think it's like how you do it in sequencing that's so important too. And to say, and not to lie either, not to say I agree with you. You know, you don't have to say I agree with you. You can say I disagree with you in ways that allow for the conversation to evolve. And for your and so that's the first thing. And I think the second thing too, in the power of storytelling, is when someone tells their story and they've been wronged, it's also part of the process towards reconciliation. And we've seen this in Rwanda, we've seen this in South Africa, we've seen this in a few other places around the world. The power of that too, of telling of what happened after with Holocaust survivors, most importantly, and telling the story. And the power of being able to tell your story but it's not the only thing. And I want to make sure I'm clear on that. The conversation is not the only part that brings us together. It's not the only thing that brings us peace. It's not the only thing that brings us belonging. It's the start. But if you don't start there, you're not going to get anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it's important to look at this as one piece of the puzzle, right? So one of the questions that we got is, how do we humanize and start conversations, and really thinking about it on the large scale when there are political leaders that are divisive and polarizing?
Yeah, so so here's the thing that was interesting in our focus group research, is that people recognized that actually celebrities, they saw both celebrities and politicians as celebrities. This is the irony. There's a little bit of irony going on here, but they saw them as untrustworthy. And they felt that their family and friends and their communities and their neighbors, they trusted the information that came from them more than what was coming from politicians, because they felt that politicians have an agenda and that the agenda actually doesn't include them. And so what I found, though, when studying it further, is that how do we actually reach people? Because what's the difference is that people who have a national stage and who are constantly flooding the airwaves with a certain narrative, then this is the hard part to moving to conversations is how do we build a platform to counter that narrative, which is easily accessible and which has, quite frankly, billions of dollars behind it. So how do we begin to chip away at it? It's not impossible, but it does mean that this is a complex problem that requires a complex solution. There is no one, that's what I'm trying to say, there is no one silver bullet answer to this. It's a combination. And part of it is to, one, think about what messengers you use to counter the narrative. Don't counter a politician's narrative with another politician. Counter the politician's narrative with somebody from your neighborhood. That's one of the ways to do it. And which message? Bring it back to common values. So our research showed us that there were 5 common values that the people that we were speaking to and that felt that we shared together. One is honesty. Who doesn't want to talk about honesty? And we don't call it corruption. It wasn't called corruption, though. The word that was used was honesty. The second was hard work. What do you we asked people, what do you think about that a value that Americans share across the board? I said hard work. The third was justice. You can do a lot with that word justice. The fourth was family, the importance of family and taking care of family. And the fifth was actually community, the power of community and resilience. That we saw across the spectrum was resonating, those 5 values. So that's my advice. Bring it back there. We've got to talk about what does a social contract look like? What does that social contract look like that binds us together in a way where we say, I see myself in your future and I see you in my future too. Right now, I don't think a lot of us are seeing each other in each other's future. People are tired, people are exhausted. And I'm hearing again and again that people are tired of this toxicity.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions coming in. So we have some really good ones that I'm
trying not to read them so that I could actually.
No, it looks so hard. So someone asked, as a member of a minority, it's not unusual to be invited to explain one's religion or ethnicity to a group of well-intentioned people who are unfamiliar with it. What advice do you have for people who, are not experts on the subject or trained to explain it and answer questions?
It's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. I think one is to remember we are not animals at the zoo. So I oftentimes tell people that I am not here for your entertainment. And so it's setting the expectations on early on and claiming your own agency, right? And so it's sort of setting those boundaries a little bit of saying like, I'm not apologizing for who I am. And also I'm not necessarily asking you to accept my religion or asking you to accept my identity. What I'm saying is that this is how I exist and I am telling my story and I think that we have more in common than we have differences. And I want to counter that narrative because right now we're in a very, so owning your intentions. I think owning your intentions is very useful, important, and helps set the stage for that conversation to take place in a way that creates a safe space. It creates a safe space for you, and it creates a safe space for the person that you're talking to. And I think that kind of gets to this power dynamic too, of where sometimes we feel as a minority that the majority has power over us. And so it's to sort of say like, that's uncomfortable, and naming it and sort of naming the elephant in the room and where you kind of feel uncomfortable. And then the third, I would really think, and I get a lot of thought to this about trigger words. We're in a time period historically right now where there's a lot of triggering language. And so asking about, is there any triggering language that I should avoid? And sort of starting it like that. And then just be yourself and really be sincere and speak from the heart like I'm doing right now. It's very vulnerable. It's not comfortable. There's no, there is no way that when you're exposing yourself and you're speaking from the heart, you are uncomfortable. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But it's also, in my opinion, where the real magic happens.
Yeah. I mean, all of this work, no matter what side you're on, is what piece you play is uncomfortable. And so leaning into that discomfort is really key.
And I just wanted to add to that, just another very quick story. And that's when I was a law student, when I was a third year law student, I was invited to, some of you might know him, but he's now the vice president of Duke for Communications and Government Relations, Mike Schoenfeld. And at the time, he was the vice chancellor at Vanderbilt. And he invited me for Thanksgiving dinner. There was another family that was there. And I remember this woman who was sitting next to me. She didn't know I was a law student at all. And she said to me, kind of in a snarky way. I'm not sure if she meant it that way, but to this day, I'm not sure if she meant it to be patronizing or to be genuine. I don't know. But she said to me, "What do you do other than being a professional conversationalist?" And and she said, "Did they hire you to be here?" She was like, "I'm really enjoying the conversation." She said, "Are you here as a professional conversationalist, and can I take you to dinner parties?" Literally, is what she says to me. And she was from a different generation. And I said, "Well, I'm a lawyer," and I kind of started talking about my legal plans and my law career and all of those types of things. But, I come back now and think about that. And like, I've now been practicing law for 13 years. And I'm coming back to that comment. I can't, as a lawyer, I really can't be as effective as I want to be in terms of being a conflict resolutions practitioner and a mediator if I don't lean on those conversationalist skills. As simple as it sounds, it's actually, I keep going back to that point, but it in and of itself is a part, is just as important, if not more important, than my legal skills.
Yeah. So I know that you recently are a new mom. So I think that this will be, a very good question for you. But how do we model this for our very young children?
Yeah, I thank you for that. My baby's name, she's 3 months old. Her name is Aya. And so every day you model for your child, and I think it's owning mistakes. We're not always going to get it right, and just not being defensive. I mean, I found myself too sometimes always kind of going down the rabbit hole of trying to explain a mistake rather than just sort of owning it and say, you know what, I could have done that differently. And I'm going to try to do that differently. And here's how. But at the same time, also sort of like owning the successes too, and not being apologetic for that. Sometimes we as women can be more often than from my own experience and from the research that I've read around this. But in terms of modeling, and also really talking about and listening to about, the 3 months old can't speak yet. She can give cues about what she likes and doesn't like, but just of being an aunt, and also of being, it takes a village to raise, and being a member of the village of other friends and their children, of like watching that is like really talking about, what future do you want? Not what future do I think you should have? What's your vision? And engaging them in early on. Like, we just at Millions of Conversations, we hosted one of our best panel discussions yet with people with high school students talking about what the future of the South looks like. I learned so much from just listening.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. So, it is more important than ever now that we fight for the rights of all communities, but especially those that we might not belong to. And at ADL, the second part of our mission is to secure justice and fair treatment for all. Why is it important for Jews and Muslims to support one another in the fight against both anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias?
Yeah, thank you for that question. For me, it's at the heart of what I do. And for me, I fight for dignity and justice with no exception. It's not pick and choose for me. I will fight till the end, just as hard and just as strong against anti-Semitism as I will against anti-Muslim bias. And as I work on my book, my editor asked me, and I took this book out, so I thought you might ask me that. And it's the book, for those of you who've read it, you'll relate to it. For those of you who haven't read it yet, I strongly suggest it. The Hare with Amber Eyes. It's a novel about one family's, also their century-long quest for peace and belonging. And it talks a lot she suggested that book to me. She thought I could relate to it, but she didn't realize, she said she didn't realize why I would relate to it. It's because the style of how it was written. But one of the reasons I related to it is because Edmund de Waals talked in this book about the history of anti-Semitism and the roots of anti-Semitism. And it was the first time that I ever had been exposed to the history of anti-Semitism and really was able to dig in and understand that it started in the late 19th century in Europe. And I started talking to people, I realized that many people don't know that. Many people don't understand that. They don't know actually the roots of anti-Semitism and what we even mean when we say that is an anti-Semitic statement. And the name of the book is The Hare with Amber Eyes, H-A-R-E, The Hare with Amber Eyes. I'll type it in when I'm finished here. And it goes back to this other point in terms of working together, our communities working together. It's the narrative. People are trying to box us into a narrative of, and I've heard this all the time, people will say that they're surprised as a Muslim that I'm fighting against anti-Semitism. And they'll tell my Jewish neighbor, oh, that's unusual that you've written a letter in support of Zulfat Sawara, who was the first Muslim elected as a Muslim in the state of Tennessee. But I ask people, why is that surprising? Why should that be surprising? It should not be surprising. It's who we are. It's what we stand for. And I also tell people to watch, the roots of anti-Muslim bias are not the same as the roots of anti-Semitism. They're not the same. But I have in my experience found today in modern times that the people who hold anti-Muslim bias and the people who are anti-Semitic oftentimes are the same. And there are 78%, as the FBI has cited, 78% of hate crimes in this country are committed against Muslims and Jews. And we have common ground that we need to come together and secure and also protect our communities from that cycle of fear, hate, and violence. And I also will just leave with this. I hope and I pray that we can find the language to talk about the Palestinian and Israeli conflict in ways that's neither anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim or anti-Arab. I believe in us, and I think that we can do it. We must, and we should.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much, Samar, for being with us today and for sharing your story. ADL is an organization that promotes positivity and inclusion by combating that hate, bias, bigotry, fear that you talked so much about. And it's so nice to hear about these other organizations like Millions of Conversations that are a part of this work. We cannot do it alone. So for everyone listening today and asking yourself, what can I do? Samar gave you a lot of great tips on how to engage with other people and how to challenge things that we hear. But speak up when you hear hateful speech. Be an ally to people inside and outside of your own communities, and share facts to counter mis and disinformation. And if you have school-age children, you can reach out to your local ADL office about bringing our program No Place for Hate to their schools so we can change the hearts and minds of our youth. And you exhibited that so beautifully today, Samar. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I wish we could have this conversation for another hour, but we will share the recording, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, Samar.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful rest of your day.